Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. Thank you for joining today's episode. We're on a mission to share e-commerce logistics insights, trends, successes, and challenges from the leaders and innovators in our space.
I've always said to people that I think if you can have a foot in both worlds, like the world of your user on the warehouse floor, and like you can really understand the technology, you can make magic happen for those people.
Welcome, eCom Logistics Nation. This episode, Ninad and I welcome Joe Gullo, Vice President of Supply Chain and Logistics for the Thursday Boot Company. Joe is a startup supply chain executive who specializes in e-commerce logistics at the intersection of tech and ops. His experience includes working with companies such as Jet.com, Walmart, Revzilla, Glossier, and Thursday Boots. Lately, Joe has been focused on enhancing workday experiences for users and finding practical solutions to challenges faced across the D2C landscape. This is definitely going to be a fun conversation for us. Joe, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. Can't wait to be here.
Welcome, Joe. I've been looking forward to this one.
Yes,
Great.
we are. We're going to have some fun here. And Joe, you have such a interesting, vast experience. We were just talking actually before we hit record, and it includes being employee 50 at Jet.com and launching a e-commerce fulfillment facility with a rubber mallet and building it from there. Would love if we could start with you sharing some of the experiences you've had and maybe some of your career highlights and what pivotal experiences have led you throughout your journey.
Sure. Sounds great. So I've always been a startup e-com executive, like I mentioned, and executive with a lowercase e, very much working all the time from startups with dirt floors, literally the very first one that I worked at selling used textbooks, all the way up to working for sort of some of the biggest brands today. I've worked for companies at every scope and size, been involved in operations, which is a little hard to believe. Every scope and size, I have to think, from fulfillment centers with just myself building shelves to fully automated thousands of people, multi-node network operations. I went from selling college textbooks on the Amazon marketplace and eventually realized that books are books, right? And the form factor is the same. And I wasn't really had really not much more opportunity to learn. And this was sort of early days of the Amazon marketplace. This was like in the mid 2000s. Moved on to a company like Revzilla, where we sold motorcycle accessories and attire. So a huge swath of product types from tires, which were fun to ship, exhaust systems, $1,000 leather jackets. We had $4,000 helmets, and sort of everything in between, everything but the bike, pretty much. And then to Jet, where anyone who's familiar with that story, Jet was certainly a rocket ship. I got hired and was told, you'll have 20 people in a fulfillment center. No big deal. That turned into a couple thousand people in a fulfillment center, 500 within 2 months. A truly story. I can't believe my marriage survived it. Still here. And then to the eventual Walmart acquisition, where things truly actually got more fun after that, because we really got to get into the battle of modern day e-commerce, which was super cool. And then today, and for the past few years, I've switched out of that own fulfillment, in-house tech world, where I was at Walmart and Jet and Revzilla, to a more D2C focus, my time at Glossier and working with 3PLs, my time currently at Thursday Boots, and also working with 3PLs and all the challenges that go along there. And I'm beginning to realize, as we mentioned earlier, that like a lot of these brands are solving the same problems. There's not a hole that's really unique and special. And if you can solve it at one place, you can begin to solve it everywhere else, even to the point of the same Google Sheets people are using, doing the same functions at different companies. Like it's remarkably the same.
Oh, it pretty much is the same. I always say the secret sauce is usually ketchup, right? You are following the same principles. Everyone thinks there is a secret sauce. Talking about your career, something that just hit me was the fact the journeys are so similar, but some of the experiences I've had or Dan's had and you have had is, working with smaller brands, but then where you said Jet gets acquired by Walmart, punching above your weight, even though you are large, but you think you have a chance, specifically at Amazon. I don't know how much did you guys talk about Amazon, but when we were at FedEx, we would incessantly talk about Amazon, right? Hey, we think we can take over it. We think we can actually compete with them, right? Yeah. And there was an actual chance. And I think there is a lot of fun knowing those little nuances of operations, like handling books, or my experience being doing a little bit of general merchandise or helping with small e-commerce, and then trying to say, okay, what do we need to do to be able to scale this out, and taking all of that experience, and not just individual, but the collective experience of the team, and just driving towards a mission. Eventually that fades away, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it was, I think you find, at least in my experience, like so many different types of products that we're fulfilling. Like when you get to that big scale of a Walmart or an Amazon, it's, oh, this all makes sense now, right? Like you can apply all that knowledge. You know, we had 200,000 SKUs plus in a fulfillment center, right? And everything's different from vacuums to peanut butter. And you get to apply like all that knowledge to those various form factors and figure out what works like good enough kind of for all of it.
Yeah. Looking at that scale of supply chains, working with Genco, I had the pleasure of helping build a Target.com facility. But this facility was specifically designed for high throughput, only sortable products. Yeah. You hear about non-conveyable and conveyable split into a building, but then go into just build a single facility that's ready to pump out 300,000 packages a day. And the only products that it carries are sortable. And you understand the scale of large supply chain. Then it's actually humbling going through that experience, I would say.
It is. And at Jet, what we found was that because we knew where we were going-ish, we had to build for flexibility. So we both built for flexibility in terms of our systems and our processes, and everything was in-house, developed and built. And we also hired for flexibility. And when I would sit there and I hired probably every single associate up into the 100. And eventually I got some help. And one of the main things I focused on people was like, we're going to live in chaos. So you have to have some flexibility of mind and just be okay with that chaos. And that sort of went hand in hand with the building as I reflected on it. Like the buildings were focused chaos and the people were focused chaos, and we got there.
And you know what I also realized exactly that is, from a chaos perspective, if you can use that chaos to your own advantage of operationalizing that chaos, right? Like where my dynamic plan for execution is literally changing every 5 minutes to stay operationally current and deliver the best customer experience. I think it's hard, but if you can harness the chaos, it actually works to your own benefit inside the warehousing environment.
Yeah, because you begin to build a team, I think, that it's like the concept of like leadership at every level, right? Like you breed incredible leaders in that environment. Now, there's a particular type of leader who may thrive and crave that craziness. Our first 10 employees, for instance, in the one fulfillment center I ran, all went on, stayed the whole time, and even to this day are in pretty big management positions. And they started as pickers and receivers and hourly associates because they just were the right people in the right moment and just loved what we were doing.
Yeah.
I was waiting for Ninad to say, and maybe even thank me for creating that chaotic environment, because I was on the commercial side and I was the one bringing in every type of SKU and product and size and weight that you could imagine. But I think what that taught us over time is how to work together, commercial, operations, technology, and how to learn to say yes and obviously learn when to say no. But the yeses became more because everyone was becoming and learning how to be adaptive and very flexible to drive additional revenue. And the one other thing I wanted to just go back to, because it stuck with me, Joe, is when you said that your marriage survived. And it is really hard sometimes, especially when you're in the trenches and you're in the facility. And I don't know if I've ever shared this on the podcast before, but when I owned 3PL called Rapid Fulfillment, for Christmas one year, my wife bought me a cot. And she said, if you're not going to come home, at least get some sleep. It is tough on marriages, but I'm glad to see we all made it to the other side.
Yeah, it was certainly a challenge. And I've tried to keep it in mind a little more since the Jet era. But like I started grad school a month before I joined Jet. And then my first son was born a month before Jet launched, which, as you can imagine, was insane. Good news, great kid. The very first night that he slept through the night was the day that Jet launched. I remember coming home at 11 o'clock. And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to be up in 2 hours. And then I woke up at 7. Where am I? Time traveled. Yeah, it was a good boy.
Beautiful.
Makes sense.
So Joe, what I'd love to jump in, because you have such you have experience on both sides of the fence, right? With brands that have done their own fulfillment, companies like Jet and Walmart. And then you've worked with a lot of brands that have outsourced to a 3PL. So would love to maybe just have a conversation about what's that process you go through, because we talk to a lot of brands on a daily basis that the first question they're trying to answer is, should I do it myself or should I go seek a partner to do my fulfillment for me? So maybe you could just share like what's the thought process you've gone through or how you analyzed that for the companies you've worked for?
Sure. I will transparently say that for most of my career, I was fairly anti 3PL. So I'm sorry, everybody. If I go back and look at, I remember having this conversation specifically with myself at Revzilla. And so Revzilla was a very fast growing retailer with a large swath of SKUs, but very low depth in those SKUs. So only around 3 or 4 units per SKU in the warehouse. And we had a really interesting supply chain model where we could support that, and turn was high, and it worked for us. But we had our supplier base was on a spectrum of sophistication. So we had everything from a guy in his garage making gloves by hand to enormous distributors who owned like 50% of the market. And so we even built our WMS in-house there to be able to handle that huge variety of what we were going to get. Because you guys know at inbound, it's garbage in, garbage out. Like if we can solve it at inbound, then we're pretty much good for the rest of the process in the building. Yeah. And so I remember sitting there thinking we have at Revzilla at that time, there were 2 facilities, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. We had rolled out our own WMS, and which is really good because I designed it. I think it's great. And I don't think they use it anymore. So maybe that speaks volumes. But could we outsource this? And I think the answer there was we probably couldn't because it was so complex. And there was already some infrastructure in place, and we had made some investments, right, in running those operations. But when you look at it, so for instance, fast forward at Glossier, we took a real hard look at doing our own fulfillment because I knew we could save money by doing it, right? If we made a big initial investment at a per unit level, we could definitely save cost. But the question there is that our highest and best use, right, of our capital? And do we really want to build that muscle in-house? Yes, I feel like I think I have a lot of knowledge in that space. My boss at the time also had a ton of knowledge in that space, but that was just 2 of us, right? And so were we prepared to make a $10 million investment at that time? And we designed a building. We went through the whole process to get a building with the throughput that we thought we needed in the location that we thought we needed it. And we were going to do a sort of hybrid 3PL and our own fulfillment model. But it really came down to we have a limited amount of capital to deploy. To get that ROI, it's going to cost us a lot. And is that really what we should do? Or could we grow the business further, not hire a whole team of people in the fulfillment centers and keep the business focus on moving forward? And I think that's really the question you have to answer for yourself. What do you want to do? Do you want to be great at fulfillment? Because you can if you really focus on it. But if you don't have that in-house muscle and like a founder or co-founder loves, lives, and breathes supply chain and fulfillment, then you probably shouldn't do it. Like focus on what is going to drive revenue, drive profitability. And there are other experts out there you could hand it off to. And maybe it will cost you a little more money, but maybe not. Because unless you're an expert, it's going to cost you a fortune to figure out fulfillment. It's not easy, as you guys know, right? It's extremely hard. And that like hockey stick of efficiency that everybody thinks they're going to get, you only get it if you're great. And it's going to take you a long time to be great.
Exactly. Yeah. And 3PLs are the ones that are experts at actually making that hockey stick happen. So just depend on the 3PLs. Joe, interestingly, I get asked this question. I'm sure Dan does as well, at least a couple times a week in some or the other interaction about, should I build my WMS? And it's almost every single time. If you have a strategic advantage by building your own WMS, that you are going to somehow differentiate yourself from a competitive space or something of that nature, do it.
Yeah.
Right. Do it. If you are extremely unique, you are a startup that's a 3PL and you want to build a WMS, do it. You are hyperscale. You want to drive certain levels of efficiency by daisy chaining all these warehouses, do it. Other than that, get it off the shelf and focus on more supply chain core capabilities. How you get your products that? How do you use your warehouse data to better enhance the end customer experience or the vendor experience, or being able to shorten or increase the inventory turns or something of that nature. Focus on that. If you have the capital investment in technology, not the WMS. I consider WMS to be commodity at this point.
Yeah. And I would say in today, especially, it's a very nerdy statement I'm going to make here. I'm a sort of WMS enthusiast. I love WMS. I think you guys do too. And 10, 15 years ago, I think we were living in a different world than we are today, where everything was on-prem and it was like very heavy. And it was just like every solution was heavyweight, and like little brands it was difficult for. And at Revzilla, for instance, we were a very tech-first company. The three founders were developers. And so they built something magical, like the one co-founder and his team. So I don't want to belittle it. It was a huge effort, but it was we did it in a few months, and it was something great that worked perfectly for our company. At Jet, we did the same thing, but we were scaling at 1,000+% a year. So we had to own our own destiny. If you're 40, 50% a year, maybe if you're not growing that much at all, don't do it. Get it. There are great off-the-shelf products you can get today that are like, I look at a number of them, like, that's probably what I would have built if I've been doing this for the last 10 years. That looks great.
The market has shifted so much to the point you are making in the WMS space. I'm loving it, because about 5 years ago, all you could get was the tier ones or tier twos that all took 6 months to implement. Or then you had these like real Mickey Mouse WMSs that I wouldn't even call WMS. And now you can get a good subscription solution in the tier 2 space that is affordable, that you can implement really quickly and get the efficiencies you're looking for. Will it do 100% of what you want to do? Probably not. No. But it's going to get you to the 95% level. Now let's get focused on how you do the execution.
Right. Yeah. At Glossier, we tackled that exact thing, right? So we designed this whole building, and they were like, all right, what WMS are we going to pick? And without naming names, there were a few that I'm a fan of. And there was one in particular that I thought was great that we would have used, but our integrator had never worked with them before. And I could just like looking into the future, could tell it was going to be a long process to get the two to work together. Simultaneously, the market began to change. COVID was happening, and it seemed like it didn't make sense right now for us to open this building. And sidebar, the building was never opened, as you guys, I think, know.
Yes.
But what we did do is we had an interesting opportunity in our retail stores to do some micro fulfillment. And the thought process at that time was like, okay, our retail stores at Glossier are not a traditional store. They are considered a showroom with a fulfillment center attached to it. And this was even the pre-COVID model, where every order the customer purchased was picked and packed in the back and delivered to them in a bag. Now, the process that went on pre-COVID was like Slack reactions, orders being sent back by hand. It was very unsophisticated. We put a lightweight WMS in at every single one of those store locations. And then we were able to not only get all the things you get when you put in WMS in terms of metrics and tracking and efficiency, but we also got to test out a WMS without opening a $10 million building around with it. We got to test it out for $1,500 a month and like figure out, is this going to work for us or not? And you can do that today, where you could not have done that 5-10 years ago, not even close.
Absolutely. Makes all the sense in the world, man. And it's just to switch very quick gears on you, Joe, because I found it really interesting doing the research. And I think now we can talk about it, given that the dust has settled a little bit around talking about 3PLs with Quiet and Gap in their logistics foray. I felt that it was entering a new era of what you would define as 3PLs, because nobody called it a 3PL, but technically what they were doing was building a 3PL/4PL network, right? Like extending upon the Quiet capabilities. And you had a few things to say on LinkedIn. So I would be really interested in getting your point on what happened, where is the market going, where the opportunities are, like thoughts, reactions on that.
Yeah, I want to caveat, we are a customer of Quiet's and have been for 8 years. And recently I've expanded with them. Things are good in that world. I will say that, harking back to what I said before, fulfillment's hard. Like it is an underrated, really difficult task to pull off, because you are dealing with very large costs, very variable business. Nobody knows how to forecast. I don't care who tells you they're great at forecasting. Nobody is. If you can get within that 20%, like you're winning.
Count your blessings. Yeah.
I think that what Quiet tried to do was just hard. And I think really noble and admirable, but just difficult. And I think that when I began working with them a year ago, vis-a-vis Thursday Boots, my impression was there's a lot of good here. We need some operational rigor, I think, to execute. That's where I saw an opportunity. Just on the ideas were good. We were almost to like the end zone. We'd get to like the 1 yard line, and then the execution needed some improvement. Now, I think they've made a bunch of progress in the past like 6 or 8 weeks because I'm living it with them. We've seen a lot of improvement. But I think when you look at the whole 3PL space, what happened at Quiet is happening a little bit everywhere. There's this like coming to Jesus moment in the 3PL world where, especially in COVID, things went crazy and they had to go crazy. We're seeing a lot of rolling up, right? A lot of consolidation happening, a lot of little 3PLs getting gobbled up, which I think will make the whole industry stronger, because when there are 300 options, I think it's really hard to know who to trust as a brand. It's easy to sell a customer, especially if they're a customer who doesn't have a lot of knowledge of the domain. Yep. A little consolidation is going to go a long way in terms of giving people confidence in who they're choosing and like reputations are strong or not. I think it will cast a little bit more light onto what's going on. There will be, I think, fewer fly-by-night 3PLs out there. And you're going to know who's good and who's not good because they have enough customers to generate that reputation.
And you see this dichotomy of the blue-collar operations first 3PLs that are out there. Of course, then there is the mega, right? Like the DHLs and the Kuehne+Nagels and et cetera of the world, right? And then you have the disruption being caused by the tech-enabled 3PLs, right? Like it's tech first. I wouldn't say operations second, but it's definitely tech first, right? Like it's almost, hey, I'm going to give you cool dashboards and ability to look at your data in 7 different ways. And it's so dynamically changing and was changing, I should say, during the COVID era. And I think we are back to fundamentals. I think that's what's happening right now. It's like saying, okay, the party's over. Let's really realize how you do good operations, because that's by far the most important thing, right? Like you can have all the tech, but ops is what matters.
Right. And I think that's what's hard to understand because, like the dashboards are flashy and they look great. And I love dashboards. Mm-hmm. But I remember at Glossier having this conversation talking about our 3PL at the time there, who we were really happy with. This was a few years ago. And saying, actually, the particular challenges in the UK, we had a new 3PL. And I said, we're a little stressed out right now. There's some stuff that's annoying to us that we're wrestling with them on. But if you look at it as our customers happy, and know our customers happy because they're getting what they ordered when we told them they were going to get it.
Yep.
And that's as far as the customer is concerned, that's it. And if you can start there, then back up and we'll start to nitpick and is inventory and inbound and is PO transmission working and like back and forth. But hey, let's start with what is really important, the execution of the customer, because they're the most important stakeholder we've got. And if they're happy, then we can figure everything else out. If they're not happy, then okay, we got to make a change.
And Joe, there is a part of it as well, because these 3PLs, they try to do their best from operational execution, but also from a technology standpoint. And a lot of times what happens is companies end up building supply chains that are non-standard, right? Like for almost no reason, let's just call it, right? Like it's just this unique flavor of how you handle your inventory as an example. And that's actually breaking things. Yes, the frustrations with the 3PL, but there is a lot of non-standard. I would say the brands, retailers also need to look inward and say, there is not a lot of innovation that's actually necessary when it comes to like transmission of POs and ASNs and inventory. There's standardization that's working. There is, other than I used to get a batch, let's now get it real time. There should be not much of a variation out in the market.
Yeah, and I did an interview a few years ago talking about peak, and I think the message that I tried to deliver with in terms of your 3PL is be reasonable, please, to your 3PL, and they'll be reasonable to you. But like you cannot expect that like if your forecast jumps by 100%, all of a sudden out of nowhere, that they're going to be able to necessarily handle that with a ton of grace. Like it's going to be a little crazy. And my approach when working with 3PLs, at least my attempt, and I hope they would confirm this, my attempt has been to look and say, where are we high maintenance? Like, where do we make it harder than it has to be? And like, for me, I can lean back on the time when I was like in their shoes and say, I would have had words about this at the time on the inbound dock, looking at this come in like this. Okay, can we make that a change on our end? Package the product differently, arrange deliveries differently, transmit POs differently, whatever, to make it easier, because then that makes your 3PL happy. And if they're happy, like, that's good for you. And so I think if we can figure out internally, like, where do we need to do that way, or can we do it a way that is like normal and will make their lives easier, then we work better together.
Exactly. And it also helps you in being able to transition. If you standardize, right? Like when you go to the next 3PL, it's easier. When you expand your network, it's easier, right? Like it's all of those steps. We say that on the podcast quite a lot about building partnerships, right? Like with your 3PLs, whoever you are. What does building partnership mean? It is actually saying, okay, what can I do to improve? Here are things we expect you to do to improve, but what can I do to improve? And I think you have that bi-directional conversation. It's good for everyone. The end result is going to be good.
A brand on an expansion, to your exact point now that you just make around trying to standardize things, it makes it easier. Like we at Thursday Boots have gone through some expansions in the past few years with different 3PL partners. And what we've tried to do, especially in the past year or so, is look at it like step back to the 3PL and say, from an order management standpoint, like what can we make standard, right? So we found a good order management platform that we use that we're really happy with that plugs into many different 3PLs. And so we've begun to turn our process so that no matter what 3PL we work with, we flow through that OMS, and we flow everything through that OMS. Purchase order, not just outbound orders, but purchase orders, returns, all of it. And so that what that allows us to do is be much more nimble. We can make changes, make adjustments. Yep. We're doing things today in terms of pulling the levers and sending order volume around that at Walmart 7 years ago, I was in charge of this for a period of time, figuring out where the order volume was going to go across their fulfillment network. We're doing things today I'm doing alone. I did with a team of 10 really smart people a few years ago. And if you can standardize your process, you can just unlock these huge force multipliers with some of this tech that's out there.
I got goosebumps about that very particular conversation, because that is exactly, I'm a firm believer that follow standardization, and standardization is not a negative term. We don't need to innovate for the sake of innovating. I'll just, as a side note, last year I was talking to someone and we were talking about building a new inventory module, right? So the inventory structure that they had in their database was pretty, let's call it legacy. So now they hire a bunch of developers that are from the Bay Area, not from the industry. And all of a sudden we are having conversations about this NoSQL ethereal inventory statuses that come in and show up and then disappear. And I'm like, we don't need to innovate. You just need to follow good practices. Like now you're going to build something that's just going to add way too much complexity. We are not trying to build Uber.
We're not curing cancer. We're shipping toilet paper, right? We're not.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's really interesting.
I just wanted to say, Joe, your perspective on the relationship you have with the 3PL, and I think it's amazing advice, and I just wanted to call it out because we work with a bunch of 3PLs and we work with a lot of brands, and we help brands find 3PLs, and we go through that whole selection process. But the best relationships are those where the brand treats the 3PL like a strategic partner and not like a commodity. And I would say for those that are listening to Joe right now, 9 out of 10 clients of 3PLs do not treat them as a strategic partner. So if you're willing to look inward, right, and how can you help this scenario and how can you recognize what's going good and obviously work on what needs to be improved, you're going to get much further in that relationship than the rest of the clients within that building or that network. I just wanted to call that out because it is not the norm. And working with a bunch of 3PLs, I know they appreciate that greatly when there's that partnership and how do we all win mentality. So I think that's just worth calling out.
And it's not perfect, right? There are tough conversations. There are really hard conversations sometimes. Even with the best 3PL in the world, I've had partners who I just think are amazing, but things go wrong and everybody makes, for lack of a better term, stupid mistakes. It's going to happen. And I've definitely gotten frustrated at times. You try to do your best that on average, if things are positive, then you're going to win.
Makes sense. Hey, you know what? Just switching gears a little bit, looking at your career trajectory, because I find this really interesting. I say this quite a lot to a lot of people, that the best tech product folks within fulfillment specifically, or within warehousing, within supply chain, right? If you work for a finance company and you are responsible for product management of a credit card, you just need to be a credit card user and then you lean upon those experiences and build into it. But when it comes to specifically the supply chain space, if you have not been a user before to truly understand the pain and have the empathy necessary at an operational level, then it's really hard. Not that you can't be successful, but your chances of success are much greater when you come from the warehouse floor or you come from procurement where you have true understanding or supply side. And I see your trajectory. So like, how has that set you up for success? Because you started talking about dealing with books and then leading product management for Jet and Walmart. That's a big transition, but I would assume, right, that's what made the big difference.
Sure. Yeah. So just to give credit where credit is due, I definitely didn't lead WMS at Jet. That was a whole amazing team, amazing job. I just had a heavy hand, or maybe I'm just very annoying. One of those in terms of that team. But yeah, I've always, and it's like you're quoting me, I've always said to people that I think if you can have a foot in both worlds, like the world of your user on the warehouse floor, and like you can really understand the technology, you can make magic happen for those people. So think about your user in the warehouse, right? They're using this thing 40, 50, 60 hours a week. So if you build something great, like you lift them up, like you make their life better, their job better, their happiness, turnover goes down, engagement goes up, all the things. But if you build something that sucks, then it sucks. And you'll see turnover go up, engagement is down, mistakes come. And it's honestly not that hard. Like a lot of it is front end. It's UX, UI, like a way that makes it easier for me to do my job. Because if you're a picker or packer or receiver, you just want to do your job. And if I can do it with 3 less clicks, 4 less clicks, whatever it is, take an intuitive leap. If the software can take an intuitive leap for you and do the heavy lifting for you, then man, like you can really lift people up and like they enjoy their job. The other side of that happens certainly often enough. But I've always, when I try to design products, tried to think through because I'm inherently a lazy man. So I want the easiest possible way to do something. And I think that's how I try to design software when I used to do it for people doing work in their various workflows. Like, what's the easiest possible way we can get our result and still have good quality? It doesn't need to be hard.
Brother, I think we all closeted lazy people need to come out and unite because that's what makes us successful is we try to find that shortcut.
Like I don't want it to be hard. Yeah, why? It doesn't need to be hard.
Exactly. No, I can't tell you the amount of times I've had the conversation, right? Like working on tier 1 solutions and something's not working on the warehouse floor. There is 300 people working on the shift and the developer goes, but Ninad, why can't they just click this one more time? And I'm like, yeah, about 170 pickers right now on the floor doing it one more time every like 25 seconds multiplied by their entire shift.
That's real money.
Yeah, it's frustrating to them. Be like, why am I pressing this? It's the exact same thing that I'm doing every single time. Just bypass this option. But, and it comes with empathy. And one of the ways I learned it, or at least, and you can't always hire folks from the warehouse floor and try and promote them. My hiring principle when I was hiring within the warehousing systems environment was put people on the floor for the first like week or two. And the supervisors on the floor knew that anytime that Ninad had a new hire, they are going to be spending time on the floor actually working and being measured. And I see you did have ownership of labor management system. So, and being tracked on labor, right? Like from a labor throughput and perspective to be able to say, now you understand what it takes to actually make this happen.
And it's just a different animal. Like you have to experience the pain. And I would say that's the case across like the sort of like product management world, which I feel like wasn't a term even 10 years ago that I knew existed, or 15 years ago. You just have to understand your user, right? Understand your user, understand the goal, think like a person who cares about people, and then you'll do a good job.
Exactly. The first time I said we need to introduce product management principles and how we do things at FedEx, I remember Dan going, but it's a service, not a product. So, yes.
I did say that.
Yep.
I did.
It wasn't a term we were all used to, but we pulled it off.
Not at all.
I actually even stood up that department within FedEx for the first time.
Exactly. So. Product managers were a product marketing role until we came in and be like, nah. It's a whole another beast altogether.
Maybe getting towards the end, Joe, but wanted to get your perspective on, you've had a lot of great experience building organizations or logistics departments within organizations. I think that what you were able to accomplish and do at Jet.com is worthy of a PhD in logistics, right? When you go from having a mallet in your hand to having over 1,000 associates that you're ultimately responsible for, and being able to be with the founder as close as you were, right? With Mark Laurie at Jet.com and being through that expansion. For those that are listening, I think it would be great to get your perspective on, when we hear about supply chain leaders and we hear about their hiring approach and the teams they look to build, we're generally pragmatic people, but would love just to get any advice you have for those that are in logistic leadership roles or looking to advance into that. Any advice that you have as far as what it takes to build a team? What kind of, if there are 2 or 3 characteristics that you typically look for within an individual, would be great if you could share those.
Sure. I'm gonna steal the words out of an old boss of mine's mouth, but he hit it on the nose, and I agree. I like to hire a cast of characters, people who will enjoy working together a little bit, because when you do that, you can create a team that is definitely greater than some of its parts. I look for people who have suffered a little bit, for lack of a better term, who have experienced the pain of the people they're working with. Because, and this is cliche to say, those generals who lead from the front, like they understand what their soldiers are going through. And we're just shipping toilet paper, but pick orders for a full day, walk 15 miles in a manual fulfillment center, and tell me your perspective isn't different.
Yep.
Do that for a long time and tell me what your perspective is like. You begin to understand what is important and what is not, and how to prioritize things to hit your production numbers, so on and so forth. And if you can do that and have a sense of humor, and maybe not take yourself too seriously, then you begin to really make some magic. And I got really lucky at an amazing team at Revzilla where we made a lot of magic, had an incredible team at Jet that was so magical that I don't know that I'll ever recapture that sort of magic. If you can build a team of people who are maybe a little different, maybe a little weird, but have at a minimum suffered in their work, you will certainly make magic. And that's a bad answer, because how do you do that? But you just keep an eye out for it. Look for some people that maybe have some bad dad jokes or good dad jokes, and you'll find that net you're in a good place.
Yeah. You know what this reminds me of? It seems like we have had so many similar experiences. It's almost like chasing the dragon when you try to build that same team again, right?
I know.
I've had one team in 2012. Was so phenomenal. That experience that I said about Target.com, we launched one of the highest throughput facility probably anywhere within 5 months with that team, because I had worked with that team on Target Canada for about 18 months before that. And we went through some ups and downs together, including the bankruptcy of Target Canada. So that gave us this opportunity of camaraderie. We are all still friends today. And it was that team that actually delivered. Again, not that I don't have an amazing, phenomenal team today, but yes, it's how do you bring different cast of characters that all balance each other out and magic happen? And
it's not zero sum either, right?
Yeah.
You build that cast of characters through your career, and you find new ones, and you add new people to the show. Yep. And you begin to realize that, hey, we're working at one place today, but there is life after this. There's career after this.
That's right.
And take care of each other, treat each other well. I've seen not just my own sort of group of people that I lean on, but I've seen other groups of people who have moved together through organizations. It is a replicatable model. And if you can find the great people and keep them together, at least in contact, you can, over time, again, make something really great.
Awesome.
It is awesome.
I just looked up at the time and realized I got to ask you one last question. So based on all your experience, Joe, like what are some concrete steps and strategies that our listeners in logistics and supply chain industry should consider to be prepared for the future of direct to consumer? We are seeing rapid evolution, right? Everyone's talking robotics and everyone's talking about new tech, and there is also some headwinds. What would you tell people like to be prepared for the future in DTC, specifically brands, because that's where your focus area, like how, you've been working on over the last little bit?
Yeah. I think there's two big areas. And I tell this to, if I ever have a chance to give someone some advice on like picking a 3PL or like just understanding their supply chain, I say you have to look at 2 points. You have to look at your customer and say, what's important to them, right? At Amazon, they say, start with the customer, work backward. And I've never worked at Amazon, but I think that's a good place to start. It's a good data point, right? It's not everything, but it's a good data point. And then I think in terms of picking your supply chain partner and whatever it's going to be, like get boots on the ground, look around, look at the people. Are they smiling? Not everybody's happy every day.
Yes.
Do they look depressed? Is it dirty? Is it hot when it shouldn't be? Is it cold when it shouldn't be? Like, do the people look like they care about the place that they work? Because we've all seen it, right? You can have, and I had in my past, the very first warehouse that I managed was, I'm not joking, like pretty much dirt floors. It was so old, the floor had disintegrated into dirt. But we loved our job and we loved the place that we worked for, and we weren't making any money, but we loved where we worked and we took care of it, and it looked pretty good. And you can tell when you walk in a place like what state it's in. And if it's in a good state, that's a pretty good sign. So I put those two together, right? Say from partner selection, you have to have a whole list of metrics, and we could talk for another hour about what you want to look for and build them all into your agreement and make sure all your SLAs are ticked and tied. But look at the operation. And if it looks good, probably is good. And then look at your customer and what's important to them. And if there are pieces from the two that align, that's what you need.
Yeah, you got magic.
It is magic.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Joe. And yeah, I think we'll have you back for that extra hour you just mentioned. Unfortunately,
we're about vCPU all day. There we go.
So yeah, what a great conversation, Joe, as we predicted. Want to wrap things up by having you share with our listeners who want to connect with you and learn more about you and your work. What's the best way for them to reach out and make contact with you?
Sure. Just like pretty much everybody who ends this podcast, I would say LinkedIn is the place to be. I think I'm at Joseph Gullo. You can look me up. My profile is pretty wide open. I do my best to answer all the messages that I can.
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much, Joe. It was great having you.
Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, guys.
Hi, I'm Ninad Acharya, CEO and co-founder of Fulfillment IQ. And I'm here with
Dan Call, CRO and partner at Fulfillment IQ. We're the team behind the eCom Logistics podcast. Our mission is to provide you with genuine insights from our work alongside logistics leaders to help you improve your supply chain.
In the eCom Logistics podcast, we share the knowledge and the insights we've gained from working alongside amazing brands, retailers, 3PLs, and VCs, so you can make the most out of your supply chain journey.
If you like what you're hearing, we'd truly appreciate your support with a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting channel. Your feedback not only keeps us going, but also helps others find the podcast. If you think Fulfillment IQ can assist you, or if you have an idea related to logistics, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always up for a chat and ready to explore new possibilities together.
Stay tuned to the eCom Logistics podcast on your favorite podcast platform for fresh and practical insights into e-commerce and logistics. Until next time, let's keep making a difference in logistics together.